can't believe I'm finally saying this, but here's my parents' love story. It's going to be a series called The Lover Who Turned Into the Wife. I can't believe I'm finally saying this, but here's my parents' love story. It's going to be a series called The Lover Who Turned Into the Wife. But for this, we need context. Unfortunately, my mom grew up in a household where there was a lot of cheating, where even though we're married, we have a separate life from that marriage. And at a very young age, my mom never wanted to get married because she saw it as just a piece of paper, because that's what she grew up with. She saw my grandma suffer from all the cheating, all the emotional and physical. So in my mom's mind, marriage was silly, and marriage was the worst thing that could ever happen to a woman. And most importantly, that she was never going to be the other woman. So after she runs away from my biological father and comes to the United States with my brother and I, she starts looking for work. And behold, the person interviewing her was soon to be my stepdad. But wait, this man was married and had a kid. And in the early stages of my dad pursuing my mom, he let my mom know that they were married but not together. And because my mom saw it as normal, because that's what she grew up with, she didn't see it as a big deal. Mind you, my mom was 21. She had no education, was a single mom, didn't know how to speak English, and I know it's hard to believe, but my mom lived in a cocoon for a really long time. The way that she described her childhood to me was church, home, or work. No in between. My parents continued dating for 2 years. And the biggest question, how did my dad pursue my mom? Why did my mom trust him? Stick around for a part 2. Part 2 of my parents' love story. How my mom went from the lover to the wife. How could my dad be married but pursue my mom and date my mom for 2 years? How was my mom so trusting? Believe me, I asked my mom all of these questions. My dad has been taking care of my mom since the first day he met her. I'm pretty sure he found out where she lived. And the moment that he found out that my mom was a single mom, guess who was dropping off groceries at her door? Guess who was buying her bus passes because she didn't have a car? Guess who was giving her monthly allowances so that she could be okay? Guess who was showing her around San Diego and showed her a completely different life that she didn't know that existed? The married man, my father. And I know what you're thinking, how irresponsible that he wasn't taking care of his other family. Of course not. A provider man is a provider man. And when he wasn't with my mom, he was working or with his baby girl because he still had to fulfill with his responsibilities. It came to a point where my dad urged my mom to move out of the apartment complex that we were living because it was ghetto. And finally, when we were settled in our new home, that's when my mom introduced us to him. I'm never gonna forget it. That's when I'm getting so emotional. That's when that's when we asked him if he was gonna be our dad and if he was gonna stay. And he did. He stayed, but we're not there yet. Just how he took care of my mom, he also took care of us. But then my mom got pregnant on the 2nd year of them dating. And this is where my dad has to make a choice. Stay tuned for part 3. Part 3, how my mom went from lover to being a kept wife. At this point, we know that my parents have been dating for about 2 years. My dad did tell my mom the full disclaimer that he was married, but not together. And because my mom saw that growing up, she thought it was normal. Now 2 years go by, and my dad continues being respectful, being loving, being a provider toward my mom and us, her kids. Mind you, my dad didn't miss a birthday party, a holiday, school days. He treated us as his own. We already had our little family throughout those whole 2 years. Because again, even though they were legally married, they weren't together. Then my mom gets pregnant. She tells my dad, and my dad, through a phone call, tells my mom that he was married and that he was actually living with his wife. They were still together. He knew that he needed to make a choice, either stay with my mom and start a new family and start a new life, or try again with his current family. Current legal family. And this is where my mom said, it's either her or me. What my dad ends up deciding is to go back to his legal family and try again. A month or 2 later, once my mom has her first ultrasound checkup, my mom invites my dad to the ultrasound, and that's where he told her that the relationship that he was in and that marriage that he was in had been over since they got married. The only reason why he married his current wife was because he got her pregnant. But he did not love her, but because he knew his responsibility, he decided to marry her and stay to that commitment without expecting my mom to show up. But he told my mom that he had truly fallen in love with her. And the condition that my mom put on my dad before she received him with open arms was that he needed to get legally divorced and that he could never leave again. I don't want you to think that my mom had no options. My dad wasn't the only one offering the world to my mom, by the way. My dad knew that my mom had options. He had always known. But my mom decided to be with him because he truly won her heart over. My mom was honestly devastated that my dad had put her in a situation like that. She became the other woman. She never wanted that. My dad never gave her a choice to decide to pursue the relationship or wait until he was fully divorced. And again, in this moment in time, my mom still didn't want to get married because now she didn't want to fall into the same trap my dad's previous wife did, which was, I'll get married to you because I got you pregnant. So what happened after? After they decided that they were going to stay together. Stay tuned for part 4. Part 4 on how my mom went from being the lover to being a kept wife. After my dad had fully decided to stay with my mom, divorce was filed, and within 6 months, he was officially legally separated from his first wife. My dad took all the debt and all the financial burden from the first marriage. He fully supported his ex-wife financially. And this was actually the one trait that my mom loved about my dad. He was extremely responsible and understood commitment. And even though he might have not been physically there with his baby girl all the time, she was well taken care of financially. But the damage had already been made. My mom felt like the other woman. She was pregnant with his kid. And now since my dad is divorced, they had to figure out how to pay the entire debt from the first marriage. Mind you, they weren't married. But there was one thing that my mom wanted, most of all, a family. So for 3 years, all her checks from work would go straight to my dad so that my dad could pay off the debt, afford child support, and could pay the bills for our household. But during that time, my mom also pushed and motivated my dad to continuously get promoted. And because my dad always wanted to impress my mom, still to this day, he worked his way up to the point where he was debt-free and could afford keeping my mom at home. But before doing that, he wanted to get married to my mom. But my mom did not want to get married to my dad. After seeing all the things that she saw, she thought that marriage was the worst thing. But because she loved my dad, she said, fine, but I'm not doing a single thing. And sure enough, that was a green light my dad needed to get all the paperwork, get her birth certificate, get the marriage packet, schedule an appointment with the county clerk, and make marriage happen. Literally, my mom says that all she had to do was sign her name and put the date and say I do, because my dad handled everything else. And I know what you're thinking. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Well, I don't know, you're gonna have to go to part 5 to figure that out. Part 5 on how my mom went from being the lover to a kept wife. This time I'm gonna go ahead and say it from a child's perspective because at this point I was conscious of what was going on in my parents' relationship. So 2 years of dating, legal divorce happens, and 3 years of living together but not married. At the 5-year mark, they decide to get married, and at this point, I'm about 9-10 years old, and my stepsister's 9 months younger than me, so she's about 8 or 9 years old. This is when a lot of change started happening. The moment that my parents decided to get legally married was when we started receiving blessing in every single way, financially as well as spiritually. My parents decided to start going to church, and I'm so thankful that they decided to start going to church because that's when my parents understood the importance of family and marriage. I feel like when I was telling you guys a story, you guys forget that during the late 90s and early 2000s, culture was different around marriage. And that's when my parents had met. Norms were not the same as they are now. This happened over 16, 17 years ago. So keep that in mind. But at this point, because my parents were conscientious of how important marriage was, this is when the guilt started to eat them up alive. Both my mom and my dad felt extremely guilty for the mistakes that they had done. And at this point, my mom stopped working and was a full-time stay-at-home mom. And I got to see how my mom went through a hardcore depression. Not only because she stopped working, she was someone who started working at the early age of 12, but also she understood what she had done. I guess you could say in her ignorance, she didn't really fully grasp the act that she had committed. And as children, we absolutely felt it. This was a time that my mom was repenting, and I saw her struggle. Because not only was my stepsister not making it easy for my mom to cope with her mistake, because that's another thing. My stepsister was coming over 3 times a week and every other weekend. And because we were in the same age, literally grew up together, my mom had to deal with 2 hormonal teenagers, and it was not easy for any of us. And with my parents feeling guilty, I know that their relationship started to crumble little by little. From what I saw, I think my dad struggled to set some boundaries with his ex-wife and with his current wife. My mom, for a really long time, held on to the title of other woman instead of wife. And I got to see that play out with the relationship that she had with my dad's family, with my dad, and with other individuals that didn't know the full story. And I also got to see my dad not back up my mom for a really long time. Again, coming from a child's perspective, I could be wrong, but that's what I perceived and that's what I felt. But what I could say wholeheartedly is that if it wasn't for the grace and favor of God on our family, I don't think we would have made it out the way that we did.
That was an interesting story. I have so much to say, but I'm gonna keep it brief. I feel like he wanted the benefits that came from both of these women. And most importantly, he took advantage of the other woman's situation. In fact, he noticed that he was not only getting closer to just her, but also to her kids as well. So he wanted to keep both of them in his life. This is one of the reasons he struggled with boundaries, because he never really wanted to divorce his first wife, but he actually wanted to keep the other woman as well. Because in his mind, he's convinced both of these women that he loves both of them. And he goes and tells his actual wife, the first one, that he loves her. He tells her the very same thing he's telling the other woman. So to show the other woman, because she was setting boundaries, he had to do something drastic. That is actually fulfilling the divorce that actually never really happened. He was never divorced. He was never separated from his wife. He was never leaning into divorce. He said that because that was the only way to get closer to the other woman. Because if a man is not really fully divorced, then he's still legally married. So he would say anything to make you feel better about the thing that he's doing with you, and to also make you succumb to what he's doing as well. Most importantly, if he's not divorced, it doesn't matter. He needs to be fully divorced before you introduce him to the kids. He needs to let you set, you need to know his boundaries, and you're not going to be the other woman, because mind you, if you marry him like he said he did in the end, right? He married the other woman. The family is going to struggle with you. They don't care about the full story, okay? They saw you as a woman who came in and pursued a man who's married. And you need to really care about your image at this point. And this is why he never really protected her, because he said she saw this from a child's perspective, right? I mean, the only reason he's not even doing much is because he knows that what he did is wrong. He's mostly to blame for what is happening. So his family are aware of this, saying you left your woman because you had an affair. He knows that the woman is not wrong. So he was really missing his ex-wife, and he wanted his ex-wife back without actually leaving your mother. And this is why she was going through depression, because he realized that he settled for a bastard. Your father is not as glamorous as he is, as you make him to be, because you are a child. You desperately needed a father at that point. So you would lean into anything that your child mind that desperately needed a father would lean onto. And this is why you guys cried, because most of the lovers that pursued your mother would not really stay long term. So devastated as you were as kids, you would say, oh, well, are you now our father? And he gave you hope that actually I will stay longer than the other man that stayed in your mother's life. I'm willing to commit myself. And that's the thing that you want as a child, someone to really love you, a father figure. And that's one of the reasons also you love this man so much and you adore him, because out of the man that really stayed with your mother, he's the one that put up with your mother. So you put your mother on this pedestal, your father on this pedestal, and their marriage, which is nothing but a sham basically. So they stayed with each other, and I wouldn't be surprised if he went in to his ex-wife to try and win her back, because she did nothing wrong in the end. Your mother's selfishness also led her to this point. She's not free from this. She realized that she's too selfish to let him go. He wants him. She wants him. And she was gonna marry him. This is why she had her baby. Even though she had this fear that, oh well, I'm gonna be that woman that I'm not gonna get married to. Or had that fear of something else completely different. But what would you expect from a man who left his wife to be with you? I mean, would you expect him to be a faithful lover, a genuine father? I mean, going to church does not symbolize anything. It does not change what you did. In fact, it makes a staple of what you did. It's pathetic, really, you know? But it's an interesting story to listen to. And she went on to talk about all the lessons, which I find it not necessary for me to even include in this video. It's a long series about that. It's a series after all. But I wanted to capture in these few moments because it taught something very important that we should all learn about. That's if you're willing to learn. It's important for you before you have kids to even heal on yourself, past traumas as well, because they tend to follow us. I mean, people do not understand just how much the experiences that we see as children unfold in our lives. Most of the decisions that we even took are not because we it's not because that we actually saw that. We actually saw what happened. That's really what it is. We saw what happened, and then it becomes our reality at a later stage. Well, in one way than another, but it mimics the past. It just gives you another altered reality that this is who you are. You are meant to be, basically. So I feel like it's important that we understand this simple concept that we need to heal. It's necessary. And I don't know, going to church, if it makes your heart feel warm, but I don't see any use in that, you know. Yeah. Work on yourself is important. Otherwise you're gonna be carrying trauma and then passing it to generation until the one that really wants to break it breaks it. Otherwise, she's living in a Dululu world, basically. She had this high esteem of her parents' marriage, and she actually believed that, you know, her father. It's just weird. Like, it's a really weird story, and she's telling it, like she said, from a child's perspective. She really wanted to believe in this, and her mother really wanted to hold on to something that wasn't really working to give her child, this one, the false hope that she has today.